Welcome to Soul Night Live, episode number 114. Today, our guest is Mike Keneally, and my co host is Valor Trucks. Hey, everybody, welcome to Soul Night Live, episode number 114. Today, our guest is Mike Keneally. Hi, Mike, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm good. I'm very good. I've
And
been
my good
good.
friend Valor Trucks is guest hosting today, our good friend.
Salutations.
Hey, Valor, it's good to see you.
Greetings, people of Earth.
Well, Mike, you're a busy guy as usual, so I thought we'd kind of catch up with what you're doing right now and what's coming up. I know you're part of the summer's hottest prog metal triple bill tour, Dream Theater, Animals as Leaders, and Devin Townsend, who
Yeah.
plays guitar with. So tell us a bit about all that, and for the uninitiated, tell the folks a little bit about Devin's music. I know it's very diverse, but try and
It's extremely diverse.
encapsulate it a little bit for us.
It's sort of like trying to describe my music in terms of how to boil it down, because I think both of us are similar in a lot of ways in terms of just our fascination with a lot of different styles and approaches. So most people would know Devin. A lot of people first knew of Devin when he was in Steve Vai's band on Steve's record, Sex and Religion, which was effectively, Devin's introduction to the major label music biz. And then after that project ended, he just started doing primarily, more metal oriented things, both solo and with his band Strapping Young Lad. And I'd say a lot of people were so justifiably enamored with Strapping Young Lad that they to this day think of Devin as solely a metal guy, and his interests musically are really all over the place. What all of his stuff has in common is a tremendous amount of passion and power and attention to detail, and it's I love his music a lot. I love listening to it and I love playing it, and it's been really an unexpected development in my life that I found myself in his band, but it's turned out to be incredibly in and exciting for me. I'm really happy to be in his world, and we just kind of click. So I'm very excited about what the future holds with him as well, beyond just this spate of touring that we're in right now. Because I worked with him on an album called Empath that I was a co-producer on, and I love that album. And it's if you just listen to that album, you'll get a pretty good snapshot of the diversity of Devin's interests musically, because it's there's some stuff on there that's highly proggy, and then there's some stuff on there that's highly metal. And then there's a song called "Why" that sounds like it's from a Disney musical. And there's a 20-minute epic at the end of it. It really covers a huge amount of ground. But what it all has in common is just a high degree of compositional excellence, and his musicianship is beyond reproach, and his singing is just incredible. If you go on YouTube, you'll find a number of videos of vocal instructors hearing Devin Townsend for the first time, and just being confronted with the totality of his technique, which is just superb, and the sound of his voice and the power that he puts into his performances. It's a rabbit hole if somebody decides that they want to get into Devin. There's a lot of amazing albums there that you can check out.
Excellent. Well, you know what? I think I will suggest the video from the Empath album called the song called Genesis, which doesn't really sound like Genesis, but it's much more than that. It's a plethora of flavors mixed up
Exactly.
in one song, and the video is amazing. It's like blue screen madness where you're just zipping through the galaxy one minute, and the next minute you're at the disco, and so right here I'll put a link for you all to go ahead and click it and check out your first taste of Devin's music if you haven't heard him yet.
Yeah, there's another one on that record that also has a delightful video. I don't know if it's my favorite song on the album, but actually, my favorite song on the album is called Sprite, which is this really eccentric, odd time thing. But there's a song that's got a video called Evermore, So if somebody watches Genesis and wants more from that record, they can check out Evermore. And then we did a tour for that record, which is one of the last things that I did before lockdown. And there's a live album and video from that tour called Order of Magnitude. So if anybody wants to see a full concert of me and Marcus Reuter and Morgan Ogren, and it was a 10-piece band. It was a real elaborate situation. Order of Magnitude is the video to check out. The band that we're touring with right now is a smaller band. It's a quartet, and it's so tight. It's so powerful. I love this band. And the bass player is a guy named James Leach, who was in a band called Sixth. And the drummer is a guy named Darby Todd, who's played with a lot of people, but anyone who has seen Martin Barr in the last bunch of years, Darby Todd has been the drummer in Martin Barr's band.
Awesome.
So yeah,
Martin's band is hot stuff, and if you want a more guitar-centric angle on the classic Jethro Tull catalog, check him out, because he's got his singer. Forget his name. The last name is Crisp. I want to say dead ringer for Ian, but he does the style very well, and he's a great guitar player. So all those wonderful two guitar harmonies you hear on things like "To Cry You a Song" are all there. So
that's sweet. That's cool.
Cool stuff, definitely. So tell us a little bit about the tour and where it starts and when it ends. And you're playing with Dream Theater. I'm guessing you have crossed paths with those guys a few times over the years.
Yeah. Going back to Steve Vai days when I was in Steve's band, I somehow Mike Mangini was the drummer in Steve's band in those days, long before he was the drummer in Dream Theater. And I think we had some crew members in common, so I ended up seeing a couple of Dream Theater shows back in the 90s, and first started hanging out with those guys then. John Petrucci and Mike Mangini were a part of several G3 tours when I was in Satriani's band a few years back. So I ended up hanging out with those guys then. I was on James LaBrie's Mull Muzzler albums that came out in the early aughts. I played on those records. So there have been several sort of instances of bouncing off of those guys, but this will be the first time that I've been on the road with them.
And inspired Bill.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's that you're definitely getting bang for your buck in terms of notes per dollar with Animals as Leaders opening, who are simply one of the best live experiences I've ever undergone. That was because Tosin was one of the guest instructors at a G4 guitar camp that I did with Satriani a few years back. And so the first time I ever heard Animals as Leaders live was in this small, like camp situation in like a lunchroom, and they blew my mind. They're just so freaking good. I
could imagine. He's just one of the most inspired players to hit the scene in the last 15 years.
That's exactly. Yeah, he's carved out a territory that's all his own. And that whole band is spectacular.
And people like him have really taken guitar playing to another level. I mean, forget your Ingve and all that 80s stuff. That was then. This is now.
Yeah, I think he's been truly, an inspiration and a catalyst for a lot of younger players these days. What Animals has done.
He's got a great sense of style too.
Yeah. Yeah, unlike me, he knows how to present himself on stage.
His own instrument company these days too.
Yep.
Yeah, like he's an 8-string player. Am I right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a world.
And he knows what he's doing with all of them. So I've just put up the schedule here, and it starts June 16th in Cedar Park at the HEB Center.
Excellent.
Cedar Park, Texas.
Well, that's the ticket for the summer, I think. So check it out, folks. You're going to get a lot of bang for your buck.
And then we move, through 3 dates in Texas. We move through Florida for 3 dates, then to Atlanta, where I hope to see you guys. Washington, PA, New York, Bridgeport, Philly, Boston, then up to Quebec and Ontario, Gary, Indiana, and Cleveland and Newport, Kentucky, Detroit, Oshkosh, B'gosh, and Cedar Rapids, Denver, Spokane, back into Canada, Calgary, Edmonton, Vancouver, Redmond, Washington, San Jose, Inglewood, and ending in Phoenix, a scant few hours from where I currently find myself.
Excellent. Almost back home then. And here in Atlanta, you're playing at the fabulous Fox Theater, which is
City in my head.
Exactly the place Todd did the Utopia recording all those days years ago, decades ago.
Yep.
Have you ever played the Fox before or been in there?
I feel like I have. Yeah, I have a horrible time remembering where I've been and what I've done in my life, but I feel like I've played there with Satriani.
Oh yeah, it's beautiful. It's got like it's one of those turn of the century theaters where the ceiling's painted to look like the night sky, and there's little lights that twinkle. It looks like stars, and it's quite a compelling setting. I can't imagine having a mosh pit there, but I'm who knows?
I think. Well, I mean, we're mainly playing. It's a seated venue, right? So we're mainly playing seated venues on this tour, I think, and I've already seen some people complaining about the fact that they're just going to have to sit and listen. Sorry, guys.
Yeah. But what a great setting! The sound in there is awesome. So
I'm excited. I'm excited.
Pretty darn cool. Pretty majestic.
Yeah, I only have like the slightest bit of hesitancy to. I'm 98% certain that I played there with Joe.
I bet you have. I almost feel like. No, I think we saw you at Symphony Hall the year we went, but I don't know.
You know who I have to ask is Brian Beller, because he has a freakish ability to remember every single place he's been in his life, and I have a freakish ability to just wipe the slate clean every morning when I wake up. I don't remember what I've done, so it's
that's a laudable skill right there.
So let's talk a bit about your new solo album.
Right.
And, fill folks in on the title for starters, because it's kind of unique, and I was curious what the inspiration was for it.
It's the name of the album is "The Thing That Knowledge Can't Eat," and that's a reference to a phrase, a word, which comes up on the last song on the album. The last song is called "The Carousel of Progress," and there's a word which you can just barely hear in the background vocals at one point, which is Yale Bangura. And I've read this. I apologize for not remembering the name of the author offhand. He's a shaman from an African tribe known as the Dagara, and this is a Dagara word, Yale Bangura, which is the closest word that they have in their dialect to indicate the something resembling the supernatural. They don't actually have a word for supernatural because they don't really embrace that concept. It's all part of natural existence, even those things that can't readily be explained by the circumscribed tiny amount of human knowledge. It's an acknowledgement that there are things happening that can't readily be described, and this word, the closest thing to an English translation for this word is "the thing that knowledge can't eat," which talking to my wife Sarah, she said, well, that's basically saying you can't get your head around it. And it's literally saying that. The more I thought about it, it's like the knowledge as described by the brain, as illustrated by the human head, can't eat or literally get its head around it. So I thought that was perceptive of her to make that connection. But basically, it's the closest word that they have to describe the concept of what we would call supernatural.
Awesome. Well, I like it a little better than your original title, which was Draw This Pirate, I think it was.
Draw the Pirate. Well, that wasn't the original one. That was I had a list of about 8 titles for this album. At one point I was going to call it you know how Adele has put out a series of records that are her age?
Yes.
Right. So I thought it would be funny to call the album 60, because it's so there's nothing rock and roll about putting out an album and acknowledging the fact that you're 60 years old. But by the time we actually put it out, I was already 61, and that I didn't think that was as good a title. And I remember having a conversation with Scott Chatfield, who runs our record label XOX, and yeah, we were batting Draw the Pirate back and forth, which has resonance for me as somebody who grew up seeing those Art Institute advertisements with the pirate and the turtle and
TV
all
guide
that.
every week.
Yeah, exactly. But that's pretty arcane, and so Scott said, well, what are some other lyrics on the album? Because the Draw the Pirate is from the song Spigot. There was a point where I thought the album was going to be called Spigot. There was a title that I liked for a while called First One to Levitate Wins. I
like that.
I like that too. Maybe that's the next record.
If you believe in telekinesis, raise my hand.
So I was going through all the lyrics on the album, and then I finally got to the last record, and I saw that word Yale Mangura, and I was explaining to Scott what it meant, and that it was that the closest thing to a literal English translation was the thing that knowledge can't eat. And Scott just went, oh! He knew instantly that that's what the album should be called. And then it took me like a weekend to come around to it. And then now I'm just like thrilled. I'm glad that that's where we landed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
the words on this album are amazing. I mean, you're always deft, right? There's always a lyric turn in the things that you do that make me go, that's really cool. But I got to tell you, I got to the end of Logo and I got to the line, we are the world's largest putter of words into larger words. And I stopped dead. And I said, that is the most brilliant thing I've heard all day.
Yeah, thank you.
I love that very much.
Thank you. Yeah. I appreciate that. That was funny, that song, because I was at Scott's and he had this upright piano that I played on a bunch of records. The song Hallmark on Scambot One was played on this piano, and
cool.
and I was just one day remember thinking I just want to write a piano song, and I sat down. That song came out really fast. We recorded it very quickly, and I put a bass on it, and I said, okay, what is this? And shortly afterward, I got home where I have a big stack of lyrics that I've written through the decades that haven't been used for anything. And I found those words. I found the words to Logos in there, and I couldn't even remember having written them. And so I put up the music, the piano thing I had written on the laptop, and kind of mumbled along with it with these lyrics, and said, this is clearly meant to be. And I laughed too. I laughed too when I got to that part about the world's largest putter of words. It's all right, I think. And I never imagined that it would be the first song on the album. And again, it was Sarah who said, what if you start with Logos? I was shuffling the songs like crazy, trying to figure out the sequence. And I never considered putting Logos first, because it's just such a weird song to start the album with. And again, I can't imagine it starting another way now. I'm happy that that she decided for me.
It's a fun way to get started. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of like Big Screen Boboli or one of those kind of.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I've started a number of albums oddly. I'd probably boil that Dust Beck starting with that song "Sooth" is one of the weirdest things I've ever done, and I was so at the time so completely unconcerned with catering to anyone's needs that I was happy to start that album with the most peculiar, obscure thing on it. It gave me a huge kick. But on this record, I was feeling like, well, this is my first album in 7 years, and it's a more concise, accessible record for me. And I thought that maybe it was going to start with Big Hit Song for a while. Which in its own way is a peculiar song too. But it's starting with that song. What I like about it is that it's so stripped down instrumentally. And then I see that what I ended up doing was just kind of the album gains orchestrationally as it goes. It starts with this song that's just piano and bass and voices. and then it goes into Both Sides of the Street, which is, you know, like a pretty sparse rock and roll arrangement, into Mercury in Second Grade, which is you know, an acoustic song with relatively minimal instrumentation, and then you get Celery with Steve on it, and then you get Spigot, which gets more spacey, and then you get Ack with the Metropole guys on there, and then the last three songs are just like you know, pretty over the top in terms of the amount of overdubs and stuff. So it just kind of rolls and builds and gains instrumentation as it goes.
But what I love about this is not only is there a shared musical thread that kind of ties everything together, but you've done videos where you've got a common kind of visual lexicography that goes across many of these songs as well. I think the videos are brilliant, and I think the videos are brilliant not only in and of themselves, but in the way they tie together with each other. So I'm glad they all kind of came out at once so that I could see them kind of back to back and have the symbolism and the imagery in my head as I go from one to the next. I think they're really wonderful.
Thank you. And I have to completely give it up to the director of those videos and of the short film that contains them all. And his name is Mikko Kainenen from Finland. And the name of the complete short film is it's called The Complete Adventures of the Unrelated Sound Guy. And it's all the concepts in those videos and the imagery is his. I just handed him his imagination to handle the material any way he wanted. And I'm just so grateful that I had seen some work that he had done, and I knew that his sensibilities meshed with mine, and that it was going to work. And then when he started sending me you know, early versions, rough versions of some of the film that he was doing, I was just delighted. I love the fact that movie and those videos exist as an adjunct to the album, because I do think that they inform each other in a really nice way.
Yeah, it's brilliant. All right, I'm going to learn to control my geekitude.
No, geek away.
Yeah, what are we here for?
Makes for good talk. I think my favorite track is the last one. You know,
yeah,
it's like when you drop in and you start chugging on that one string and doing those little dyads, and the groove kicks in. You know the part I'm talking about.
Yep. I like that
too. Tell us how you came to put that together, because that's probably the most ambitious track. And there's kind of the word prog in there. I was wondering if that was kind of a subliminal kind of, hey, this is a pretty wild one here.
Well, that song went through a number of titles, and it's almost ironic, actually, because it was written, you know, that was like the first real thing that I attempted to compose during lockdown. Once lockdown hit, I realized I needed to put some kind of a home studio rig together. Was able to do that thanks to the generosity of a number of wonderful people, and I got a rig, and I started. Well, actually, the first thing I did was the MFTJ, the second MFTJ album. I don't know if you've heard that stuff yet.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So the second one of those, which is called "My Mom's Getting a Horse," was the first project that I took on with my pandemic recording rig at home, and you know the process for making MFTJ music is Scott Shore, who was the producer of that project, would send me tracks that he had done, and then I would just improvise over them on a variety of instruments, and send him the improvisations, and he would go mining for nuggets in those improvs and turn them into motifs. So that's where I started. So I was making music, but I wasn't what you would call composing in the standard way that I work on music. So that song "Carousel of Progress" was the first song that I sat down and said, okay, I'm going to write a song now. This was probably 3 months into lockdown, it was clear at that point that I wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. So I was sitting there working on this song, and I just started with that piano thing at the beginning. And for all I knew at that point, that the whole song was just going to be like a slow piano ballad thing. But I got a certain point, I did the first piano bit, which is probably a minute and a half, however long it is. I got to the end of it and I said, well, that's all I need of that, but that's not a whole song. What happens now? And at some, one day I just said, okay, I'm going to have that be essentially movement one of some sort of epic, which I didn't know how long it was going to be. It could have ended up being 20 minutes, but it just ended up being 7.5. And I was playing my green Kiesel, which also has an Evertune bridge on it, because it's a guitar that I play with Devin, and it's imperative upon me to be perfectly in tune when I'm playing in Devin's band. So I was playing the Kiesel, and it was tuned to drop D, and that those dyads just came out. I remember where I was standing in the bedroom and that started happening, and I went, "Ooh!" And I grabbed my phone and I started recording myself playing it, and then I just thought, I like this as a basis for whatever this song is going to be. So it's a stream of consciousness type of thing where I just would make a little section and then sit back and listen to it and figure out what the next section is meant to be, and just pile up those sections one by one. And when you're done, you've got a 7.5-minute song. And then I realized, once I had reached a certain point, that I wanted to bookend it by returning to the opening section, which I think works well as an ending for the song, and really works nicely as an ending for the album. For a while, I was just calling it the last song on the album, and I thought that was what the song was going to be called, but that's just a little too self-referential.
Yeah.
So as an old-time Disneyland guy, I was happy to call back to the Carousel of Progress, which was always one of my favorite rides at Disneyland when I was a kid.
Well, I was half expecting there's a great big beautiful
tomorrow. Yeah, no, I mean, just using that title is tempting fate enough with Disney. I wasn't about to actually use any of their music.
Yeah. Got pretty good lawyers around that place, right?
Yeah. Yep. It's not like they're not well equipped to do battle.
Yeah. Another one. Let's talk a bit about Celery, because that was the first single, and that's the one Steve Vai drops by and does a guitar solo on there that really takes it to the next level.
Yeah, and that was one. There's 2 songs on the album that were quickly written in 2015 when Nick DiRigilio, who works full time at Sweetwater in Fort Wayne, invited me to take part in an engineering workshop at Sweetwater, where I would show up. We'd have a small band, and he said, well, just come with a couple of songs. They can be songs you've already written, or you can write new stuff. And I'll play drums and just figure out who you want to play bass, and then we'll record 2 songs over a couple of days, and Mark, who's the engineer, will explain to the students who are in there's there were 30 people in the back of the control room while Mark was recording us, and he was explaining to them everything that he was doing as it was happening. So that song, both Celery and Spigot, were the songs that I quickly composed, like in an afternoon, just to have something new to record at this workshop. And so it was me and Nick playing drums, and Pete Griffin was the guy that I asked to play bass on it. And we went in, we got just the basic tracks for both of those recorded. Well, actually for Spigot, we recorded the basic track of electric guitar, bass, and drums, and then I actually overdubbed some acoustic guitar, and they had a really nice acoustic piano on there. So I did a number of overdubs on Spigot. But for Celery, I just had basically just a guitar track, a bass track, and a drum track. And then I had a thumb drive with the sessions on there. And then I forgot about it for like 4 or 5 years, I didn't think about those songs at all. And I couldn't even find the drive. I remember meeting Nick on the road somewhere, and he had gotten no, that's not what it was. I was like bugging Mark, the engineer, send me this stuff, because he said I'll send you these sessions, and he never did. So finally, I met up with Nick on the road, and he gave me a thumb drive that had that material, and then I didn't listen to it for a number of years, and then while I'm was working on new music, and I said, oh, let me see if I can find that thumb drive and see how those songs sound, because I didn't even remember how they went. And then I found the sessions and listened to them. These are good. These are really good. So I did some work on both of those songs with Mike Harris, who's the engineer I usually work with at Chatfield Manor prior to lockdown, but I didn't finish them. And then when I got the home rig going, one of the first things that I did, even before I started working on MFTJ or started working on Carousel of Progress, was I got out the session for Celery, and I listened to the original guitar that I played back at Sweetwater. It wasn't quite in tune, so I used the Kiesel again, that the drop D Kiesel that has the Evertune bridge on it, so it would be spot on. And as I'm working on it and doing other overdubs on it and stuff, I realized, I could play all the solos on this. I already had one solo on there that I had recorded with Mike Harris. And I said, when it gets to this next section, it needs to take off into the stratosphere. And I want it to be a different flavor than the way I play. So I called Steve, and he was, also looking for things to do during lockdown, and he came up with the solos really quickly, as I recall. It wasn't there, very little time went by between me making the request of him and him delivering. And he actually plays 2 solos. He plays a solo in the middle right after my solo, and then he does a longer solo at the rave out ending.
Right.
And it's just so beautiful, man. I love having him on the record. I love the fact that it's just so Vai, it's you hear him 2 notes in, it's him, and it's just it's a flavor I've never had on one of my records, and it was, I think it was precisely what that song needed. So kudos to me for asking.
Any thoughts on his most recent album?
Oh, it's spectacular.
I love it. Yeah.
Really no, I honestly think it's arguably a top 3 record for him. It really felt like he was in an incredibly inspired place when he was working on that music.
Oh, I totally agree.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of really cool exotic chord choices in there too. Some of those songs, and I was like, "Yeah, this is neat." This is really cool stuff.
There's only one Steve Vai, and I will always think that he is, even as revered he is as a guitar hero, I think he remains largely undervalued as a composer, which is why I was grateful when he asked me to do that piano record, because I thought that was a nice way of shining a different kind of a light on him as a composition. I mean, as a composer, to hear him just played on a solo piano, I think is a different, nice perspective on the type of things that he does. He's such a great writer.
Absolutely. Baylor, is there another song from the new album you'd like to ask about?
Well, I was wondering if you'd played the Hydra. Have you had a chance to play that triple neck monstrosity that he made?
No, I haven't. I haven't even been in the room with it, and I guarantee I wouldn't know, thing one to do with it. It's ridiculous. It's unbelievable.
No, I mean, as far as songs on the new album, I mean, we've talked about a lot of it already, but I think the one where the harmonic content and the video content are most closely aligned is Big Hit Song. I really enjoy the video for that. I really enjoy just the motif of the guy with his ear to everything. I think that's a really cool image, and it's a great song to do it with. So
no, I agree with you. I think I love all of those videos. I think Miko did a great job, but I think that the fact that Big Hit Song has more of a plot line to it as a song, I think it kind of prompted him to be, it's not it's not a blow by blow imitation of what's being described in the song, but it's a story, the same way
Right.
the song is a story. They're definitely related. And I do think that I mean that was when I got chills when I saw a rough cut for that video for the first time. It really, it's a special feeling when you do a piece of music and you don't expect it to. I mean, to me, it was just a song that was going to go on an album, and then suddenly it's got this whole other life as a result of Miko having that vision. So I'm
Yeah.
very, very grateful for that.
Very cool.
Very cool. Hey, you had mentioned Blow by Blow, and I was wondering if we could take a minute to talk about Jeff Beck. We lost him recently, the
Yeah.
giant of the guitar world, and
Yeah.
we were all gutted, to say the least. I
For
was just
sure.
wondering if you guys could kind of maybe share when you first heard him and what you love about his playing and any favorite pieces that he's done.
Wow. I guess the first time I heard him consciously, because I had heard him on Yardbird songs and stuff when I was real young, but didn't necessarily know that I was hearing him. But listening to FM radio in the early '70s, and this is a weird entry point, but the first song of his that really made a huge impact on me was "Sugarcane" from the second Jeff Beck group album, which is a really badass, weird song. With great Max Middleton piano playing on there, and just like a lot of nasty wah-wah interjections and stuff. But in no way is that like a what you would think of as a standard Jeff Beck piece. But that was the first time I heard something of his that I acknowledged as a Jeff Beck song, and I said, "Wow, this is really cool. I want to know more about what's going on here." And then my brother. It was interesting when we were growing up. I was collecting certain artists, and my brother was collecting certain artists. I was primarily a keyboardist when I was a kid. My brother was more interested in guitar, so my older brother was the one who was collecting the Jeff Beck records. And I remember when Blow by Blow came out, what a huge development that was, because we were both already into fusion-y type stuff, and so to suddenly realize that this was a direction that Jeff Beck was interested in going in was fascinating to us. And then when we heard the record, I loved the humor of it. It's like there's so much wit and this sort of just offhanded brilliance all over that album. And he was like doing lots and lots of guitar parts. There's probably on most of those songs there's like at least three guitars sort of chattering away between one another, and I loved just listening to it and diving into the depths of the arrangements of it. And there was just so much ear candy, so many little phrases. He was in that stage of discovery, right? He was inspired by McLaughlin, he was inspired by Stevie Wonder, he was inspired by a number of things, and finding a way to sort of combine those fascinations of his, and having his just complete his soul and his idiosyncratic approach to guitar. It was just such a statement, and we fell in love with that record and played it over and over and over again, and then got to see him on that tour, the Blow by Blow tour, opening for Mahavishnu Orchestra, who were on the Visions of the Emerald Beyond tour. So that was the second concert I ever went to. The first concert I ever went to was Santana on the Welcome tour, and
Wow.
that was amazing.
Yeah.
And then probably several months after that was the Blow by Blow Visions of the Emerald Beyond tour. And I saw that, and it was such a thing it felt like a privilege to even be in the room with him playing that stuff. It was so masterful, and that was a memorable night for a variety of reasons. It was the first time I ever experienced a secondhand pot high, and I was I think 13. So I'd never been in an enclosed space. The Santana concert was in the San Diego Sports Arena, which is a huge building with excellent ventilation. The Beck Mahavishnu concert was at Golden Hall, which was a smaller building with shorter ceilings with not so excellent ventilation. So it was basically just like being inside a bong. So I left that show really just happy, and there was an overnight thing at my junior high where and I had gotten dispensation to like show up late because I had to go to this concert, but it was literally overnight. All the seventh and eighth graders were staying on the school grounds all night long, and then and I show up in the middle of it, and they had already had several little rituals that they were going through. Our junior high school had our mascot was like, this is politically completely incorrect, but it was like the Comanche, and there was all this Native American imagery all over the place. So cultural appropriation everywhere you looked, and they were like the sort of concept behind the evening was that we were moving into the next phase of our maturity. And one of the things that happened was we all lined up in the assembly room, the main room of the school, and one by one we were walking behind this curtain, and the principal would hit you, and this was meant to be a representation of you are now a man kind of a thing.
Whoa.
What happened, of course, is that when you get behind the curtain, somebody punches a pillow, somebody else punches pushes the curtain so that it looks like, because we're all standing out there terrified. We see the curtain move, we hear a punch, we hear oof, and so when you actually get back there, they say, don't tell anybody. So they punch a pillow, they push the curtain, they mess up your hair, and then you're supposed to go staggering out from behind the curtain. So, and then you go to a separate location where everybody else who has already been through this has been gathered, and then you're just like, oh man, that was so cool, yeah. So I was experiencing all of this with still reeling from the secondhand high, and having just seen Jeff Beck and John McLaughlin. So I will always associate Jeff Beck with that very unusual evening.
That's awesome.
Yeah, no doubt.
My story is not nearly as cool as that. It's my stepfather was a kind of a blues rock musician, a guitar player. He's the guy who taught me my first couple of chords on guitar. And his taste when we were in the car was, what you would think. We heard a lot of Warren Zevon and Little Feat, but he had Blow by Blow, and that was one that I would request that he would play when we were in the car. So, and I guess I was 9, 10 when I first heard Jeff Beck, when I first heard that album, and it's been with me ever since. So when I got to college and I started seriously shedding, trying to get better at this instrument, it was Blow by Blow and Wired were the first two that I thought, I got to master these before I can tackle things like Mahavishnu and Return to Forever. So let's start here. Yeah,
it is a very good gateway for that stuff.
Yeah.
And then when you realize like the connection, the Jan Hammer connection, the Michael Walden connection, the connection, but for me, the glorious song above all is Diamond Dust.
I was gonna say that.
Yeah.
Always so overlooked. It's so beautiful.
I've had to play it live a couple of times, just because I can't not honor that song. It's so fucking incredibly beautiful.
As a 12-year-old, it blew my mind when I finally figured out that it had all 12 chromatic notes in the melody, and I couldn't figure out how he pulled that off.
Well, who wrote it? What's the Brian Holland, I think is the composer of that song, and
right.
I'm as soon as we're done here, I need to do some research. I need to find out more about where that song came from, unless you're doing it right now, man. It looks like you're on.
I am.
Okay.
And I love the orchestrations George Martin did on that too.
Oh, it's really beautiful. I mean, and it was bold too, because the album ends with no guitar. Like the last half of that song, there's no guitar. Once Beck's solo is done, and then he phrases the melody one more time, and then Max Middleton plays this beautiful Rhodes solo, and then it's just the final iteration of the melody. It sounds like two orchestras. It sounds, the way they fade in and out of each other. The statements of there's like the melody and then the response to the melody and the orchestration.
Yeah, Bernie Holland is the
Bernie Holland. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, to me, that's like, even with all the brilliant stuff that George Martin did with the Beatles in terms of orchestration, you can't turn your nose up at Eleanor Rigby. But the orchestration that he wrote for the end of Diamond Dust, I think, is like primo George Martin. That's George Martin at his peak.
And great on Scatterbrain as well. I think that's the other song on that album that really features a lot of that.
Yeah.
And
what an album. Jeez.
Is that the song that has as soon as you said fun humor, I thought, that one blah 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 blah. You know the one? It's almost like they stop.
Yeah, exactly. The chicken cluck. Yeah,
it sounds like he's just cracking up while he's playing that.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great. It's just great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on a bit. Let's talk a bit about the Zappa Band. Is there going to be some more action from them? And did it all start when you guys were put on the bill with King Crimson, or did it predate?
No, we had, because that was the first thing that happened. It was the first tour that I was on post lockdown. Was that King Crimson Zappa Band tour? But I had done Zappa Band actually formed. Well, we weren't called the Zappa Band yet. It was called The Bizarre World of Frank Zappa, which was the hologram tour that happened in early 2019. Right. So we did that. We did dates in the U.S. We went to England and UK and Europe and did some stuff over there. And then the logistical and financial realities of moving that tour around took hold. But the band was too good not to keep playing. So we just started doing shows as the Zappa Band, primarily at the Big Potato, and it was Ahmet who gave us the name. We were like, what do we call this? We didn't know what to call it. We didn't want to just keep calling it The Bizarre World of Frank Zappa, because that was meant to describe the whole multimedia, hologram thing. And so we were having conversations with Ahmet, because Ahmet still owned the intellectual property of this band, as he did the hologram thing, and he just said, I think you should just call it the Zappa Band as a way to make it really plain and clear that this is the official authorized Zappa Trust, imprimatur Zappa Band, because obviously there are a lot of bands playing Zappa music, and he was like looking for a way to set us apart. So he just said, just call it the Zappa Band. You're the only band that's allowed to use that name, and that's that. So we started gigging that way, mainly at the Big Potato and some other stuff around California. And then lockdown hit, and we were originally supposed to be on the road with King Crimson in 2020. And then obviously that got postponed until after lockdown. And that was the first tour that I did, after, coming back out, squinting into the sunlight, saying, oh, wow, it's okay. There is a world out here, after lockdown was over. But the tour itself was locked down. We only pretty much only went from the bus to backstage, to the stage, to backstage, and back to the bus, occasionally a hotel. But there weren't any guests on that tour. We didn't have any after show passes. It was like as hermetically sealed as it was possible to be. That tour like stayed in its bubble. People were masked backstage and stuff like that. So, and I loved it, actually, because it was already unsettling enough coming out of the house after a year and a half. And I appreciated being able to make the transition in a kind of a gentle way. And also the fact that that we didn't have a guest list, and we didn't have after show hangings and stuff like that. it just meant that we were just focused on the job at hand in a really specific way. And by the end of that tour, the Zappa Band got really good. You know, we had a 50-minute window to play every night, and we couldn't go over. You know, we would literally be yanked off the stage if we ran long. So that meant that we had to have a reliable set list and even like prescribed solo lengths. So while that's not particularly Zappa like, because you know Frank was obviously very open to chance and randomness and spontaneous things happening every night. The fact that we were essentially forced to play the same show the same way every night, with obviously different solos, but the same songs in the same order, meant that we got really freaking good at them. And so over the course of that tour, the band became a real force to contend with. And unfortunately, the concert industry was still like shaking off the dust and trying to figure out what's going on. We would have loved to have capitalized on the momentum of that tour and get out on the road as the Zappa Band and do a bunch more headlining stuff. But for some reason, it proved difficult to book, and our booking agent was only able to get us like a 2-week tour months afterward. We all had the same desire to build on that momentum, but it just didn't happen that way. So the Zappa Band was booked this year to play at the Zappa, which is a festival where I played last year with the Mike Keneally Report, which is my European trio, with a drummer from Germany and a bass player from Finland. And I very much loved playing there last year, and they were interested in bringing the Zappa Band there this year, but I'm unable to do it because of the Devin Townsend Dream Theater tour. So and Joe Travers also isn't doing it. So the rest of the Zappa Band are doing Zappa this year, but they're doing it under the name the Band from Utopia, which is a name that Robert Martin and Ray White were using to tour under for years and years prior to the Zappa Band. So they're resurrecting that name for this gig that they're doing in Zappa, which is unfortunate that I'm not going to be able to be there. But it's the same thing with not being able to do Death Clock this year. I'm just in too many freaking bands, and it's I can't do it all. So for me personally, the things that I'm really feeling the most passionate about are my own project and whatever that entails, wherever my own music takes me, and then Devin's thing, because I'm just completely in love with the whole vibe that's generated by his music and by the shows that we do. And I'm also still really enthusiastic about Progject, which is the band that Jonathan Mover and Ryo Okamoto started, that I was playing with quite a bit last year, but we haven't gigged since December, I think. So it's I think later this year there's going to be some more Progject activity as well.
I was going to ask about that next, actually. So that's a great segue. Yeah, this is
I know what you need, Sean.
Yeah, you know what my viewers are going to be wondering about. Yeah, it's like the ultimate prog tribute band, and just describe a little bit about that and how you came to decide what to play. And was there anything that was just like a real booger to dissect?
Well, the repertoire is pretty much solely Jonathan Mover, who many people probably first encountered as a member of Joe Satriani's band.
Sure, yeah, Flying in a Blue Dream, that era. Yeah,
exactly.
Stu Hamm.
And then he went on to play on the GTR record, and has also toured with the Tubes at times, and he did some touring with the Musical Box, and he just had this vision of well, it's the gear on stage is almost as important at the music as the music. When you see Mover's huge drum rig with the gong behind it, and next to that on the riser is Rio's insane keyboard stacks, and it's visually Prog just to see all their gear.
Sure.
So he had the idea really for the band. He and Rio, I think, kind of brainstormed it, and then Jonathan pretty much came up with the repertoire, including a number of medleys. There are some interesting medleyizations of songs where it goes from a Yes tune into a Crimson tune into an ELP tune or something like that. It's meant to be pretty unpredictable. It's not like you're just going to hear like a version of Roundabout that sounds like the record. There are meant to be these left turns where you're not quite sure where it's headed. But basically, it's honoring the music that we grew up loving, and that it had such a huge impact on us. And for me, it was like really funny, because he had the idea for the band. They were sort of in for a few years putting these medleys together, getting the repertoire together, just as sort of general concept for the band. And he told me later that he wanted me in the band right at the outset, but didn't think I would be interested or have time. And so it was years before he asked me to take part. And then when I went to rehearsal and I plugged in, played along, and it was just like instantly so powerful and so fun. And I realized, man, as much as I feel indebted to progressive rock, and as much time as I spent, listening to it growing up, I've played not that much of it. My own music is obviously Prog inspired, but I don't think you could necessarily call my albums Prog. I think that my stuff is really difficult to pigeonhole, but it's obviously really flavored by it. And then occasionally I would take part in like a Yes tribute with Kevin Gilbert doing the Stanley Snail thing.
Yeah, that great version of Siberian Khatru with a tad bit of Bruford thrown in the middle.
Yeah, with a Bruford detour. And so occasionally I would wave that flag, show those colors, but I very rarely like just openly played those songs on stage. So, and I feel like I have the skill set. I grew up learning that stuff, playing that stuff. The summer of my 16th year was spent doing nothing but learning every Gary Green guitar part on every Gentleman Giant album that had been released up to that time. So this music obviously is a huge part of my DNA, and I hadn't performed it that much. So this band is an opportunity for me to just like be unabashed about my Prog heart.
Yeah, well, I love the variety too. I mean, it's not just the big five acts. You've got more than that mixed in there,
Yeah, well, I mean, it's funny because Mover has played with the Tubes, but he was real insistent that the first song of the show be the song Up From the Deep, which is the first song on the first Tubes album, which is hugely proggy, but a real obscure choice to start. It's like me starting my album with Logos. It's pretty weird that we start the show with Up From the Deep as opposed to one of the big five doing one of their snazzy hits. But we I don't know what the next run of shows, what the set list is going to be, but we slam directly from Up From the Deep into the beginning of Siberian Khatru. But then we don't finish Siberian Khatru. We play Gates of Delirium instead of finishing Siberian Khatru.
Oh, far out.
Not all of Gates, but the that's like the first indication of the show that we're not just going to play the songs the way you expect to hear them. Like Siberian Khatru.
I like the medleys. It has an element of surprise, And
Yeah,
the one thing that's kind of annoying about a medley is usually they just give you a little tiny smidgen. So you
right.
feel like you're just flittering from one thing to the next and not getting a good taste of any of them. You guys don't do that. You kind of dwell on them long enough to kind of make you feel like you've seen a decent chunk of that song.
Exactly. But it does keep it unpredictable, and at the same time, it allows us to cover a lot more material than we would be able to in one show if we were playing the complete songs. We can cover a lot more ground that way. But in terms of, to answer your question of what was the hardest thing to decode, without question, it would be the middle section of Lark's Tongues One,
Oh
where it's
man.
just and then that again, but like 19 times as long. And I spent a long time, listen, I didn't have a chart for it or anything, so I was just trying to decode it off the record. I didn't want to bother Robert. Um, and I couldn't play it with a pick. Ultimately that was my failing. I learned it. I tried to play it with a pick, and it just sounded like somebody let in the cat. And so when I put down the pick and started finger picking it, that gave it a different kind of articulation that felt more like me anyway, and it allowed me to articulate each note cleanly because I don't have the frippish pick technique. Now I'm going to detour off into this. Years and years ago, when Robert was on one of the G3 tours, and I was in Steve Vai's band, he would periodically give me grief for the incorrect way that I hold a guitar pick. Because I'm untrained as a guitar player. I never had a guitar lesson, and it was always just me doing whatever I could mechanically to make things happen. So he would show me how to hold the pick, in accordance with the Fripp approach, and I was just unable to do anything with that. I couldn't play anything articulately at all. So when fast forward to several decades later, and the Zappa Band is going to open for King Crimson, I jokingly emailed Robert and I said, "I'm looking forward to seeing you, and perhaps you can remind me again how to hold a guitar pick." So it's the first night of the tour, and we're backstage, and in comes Fripp busting into the room with the mohawk and in full regalia, and everybody else in the room is just like stunned. They're jaw dropped. Robert Fripp is here, and he's like instantly sets everyone at their ease. He goes, "Hello, everybody! Oh, it's wonderful to see you." And then he turns and he sees me. He goes, "Mike, hello!" And he walks up and he grabs my arm and he grabs my wrist and he goes, "Okay, now go like this, put like this. Now put your thumb that way." And as he's doing it, he's saying, "But don't change anything about the way you play." It's like, I don't know why you're able to play the way you do, but you can, and that's great. So don't change anything. However, this is the proper way to do it. And so he's once again, it was just like 25 years ago. Once he showed me how to hold the pick, and I tried to play something, and it's just I can't do anything. And I was like, I don't understand how he can play the way he plays, and he doesn't understand how I can play the way I play, but we do.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So I'm guessing you had a chance to take in a few Crimson shows on the tour.
Oh yeah, I have several really really fond memories of a couple of beautiful nights, and we were not supposed to engage with audience members, so I would put on my mask, which had the the additional benefit of disguising me somewhat, and I would find an unpopulated area in the venue to watch them play, and yeah, there were several just incredible nights where they were just so on, and I felt so privileged to be there, and then subsequently finding out that was effectively probably their final tour. They did a short Japanese run after that date, but certainly for North America, I don't expect there's going to be any further Crimson touring. So to have been privileged to be there every night for that is really something I treasure.
Mm.
Yeah, it was a great tour. I actually caught it here. I think you guys were just on the first leg. I don't even remember who opened the second leg.
Other way around. We did the second leg. The
Oh,
first leg was CGT, the
oh, that's
California
right.
Guitar
They were
Trio.
great. Yeah, I
Yeah.
enjoyed that. I saw them at the Fox actually, which is
Hmm.
a great place to go.
Yeah.
Definitely. Well, let's see. I wanted to ask about a couple other things before we wrap it up. You've worked with a lot of different band leaders over the years, and I was wondering if you could just tell us maybe a little comparison of, Zappa versus Satriani versus Vai versus Devin, and how each of one of them kind of operates and the vibe having that person as your boss.
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess I'm fortunate that I enjoyed working for all of them. I would, I think certainly with Frank more than any of the others, there's the feeling of this is the boss, and here are the workers, and he made no bones about that fact, and he didn't understand why anybody should object to the fact that he felt I pay these guys to play my music properly, so I expect that's what they're going to do. Uh, I'm not their dad. I'm not their buddy. I'm their employer, and their job is to play my music right. Um, and my job is to serve the audience. He said, "Yeah, I'm the band's boss, and the audience is my boss." And I actually for that to be where I entered the music business, and first of all, it was just freakish that my first professional musical experience should be for the guy that I grew up idolizing. It was crazy that was my first professional touring band was for Frank Zappa. That I used to dream about playing with him. So uh, he was incredibly kind to me, and I think it was because I was so young, so inexperienced, and so obviously devoted to pleasing him. It's not that he had like that, like the kingly, yes, you will serve me, that kind of thing. It was more that he understood that I really wanted to do a good job for the music, because I felt so strongly about the music. I loved it so much. So, but at the same time, he also really enjoyed having fun, and so the music was so intricate and complex and crazy that it could be easy to imagine that rehearsals must just be like a bunch of scientists trying to unlock these mysteries. But the reality is that we were just laughing our asses off a lot of the time, and that that band had an unfortunate history. By the time it was over, not everybody was having fun, but it started from a place of real joyfulness. And so as somebody who was a complete neophyte, just showing up and suddenly having to figure out a way to function in this environment, I was delighted that even though it was demanding everything of me, that it was leavened by this humor. And I thought I saw the way he used humor to lighten things up and to sort of smooth the runway and get things accomplished. And that was very inspirational for me, as I then went on to become a band leader. And then, a few years later, I'm in Vai's band, and Steve and I, as opposed to Frank and I, Steve and I both had so much in common. We were, much closer in age. We both went through the exact same experience of working for the guy that we grew up idolizing, and processing that reality. Realizing that this isn't just some distant figure, but an actual flawed human, and different ways of coming to terms with that. But with Steve, more than with Frank, I had to really come to terms with the technical aspects of playing the guitar. With Frank, obviously, you had to be able to execute things on the guitar. If you're playing a melody from the Black Page on the guitar, you better be able to know how to play it. But with Steve, the specific requirements of Steve's music required not just knowing the notes and being able to execute them, but articulate them exactly the same way he does. If I'm playing the Attitude song with Steve, and we both go for a bend, we have to bend at exactly the same time, at exactly the same speed, and only go that far. You can't extend that bend anymore. You go up that far and you've blown it. It's like the articulation is as much a part of the music as the notes are. So my standard line about that was always, playing with Steve Vai is the best guitar lesson I ever got paid to take.
Nice.
Because I remember several dark nights of the soul prior to starting the tour, where I remember particularly, I think it was the song, it was Erotic Nightmares, and I was like learning these lines that I was supposed to play in unison with him, and just going, I can't do this. And I remember having similar feelings with Frank. It was like when I was learning certain compositions of Frank's that I just thought, this is beyond my ability, but just keep doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it. And then finally it's within your ability. You have just stretched your ability in order to encompass this part. Now you can do this. Your horizons have just been stretched. But I remember feeling with some of Steve's stuff that it was just so, he's an unbelievable guitar player. And he also has an unfair biological advantage over me in that his fingers are probably about an inch longer than mine. He really does have a reach. So that's where I kind of learned the mind over matter thing, where it was just like, I refuse to fail. There's no reason why I should be able to execute this part, but I refuse not to. So I remembered an interview with Chick Corea years and years ago, where somebody was asking about some of the stuff that he would articulate on keyboard and how it seemed superhuman, and him saying, to him it's a dance, and that sometimes he just visualizes his fingers dancing over the keyboard, and for some reason that image stuck with me. That concept helped me with learning to play Steve's stuff. If I could just imagine my fingers kind of doing a dance, think of it as choreography, that helped me. And then of course just doing it night after night after night. And with Steve Vai on the first 3 nights of that first tour in '96, the first G3 tour, my apologies, because I feel like it took me at least 4 shows before I was presenting anything that had any right to be performed in public. But after a while, it just became a part of what I was able to do.
Yeah, well, there's a great DVD of that first G3 tour where there's a good chunk of Vi's set in there, and you guys are playing everything in unison, and it's awe-inspiring. It's always fun to watch that.
And you got the giant hat.
That's right. Yeah, you got Steve to wear a giant hat too.
Yep. That became infectious. The giant hat thing. That was an unusually that was a fortuitous choice that I made to wear ridiculous hats. Because I knew that Steve as a presence on stage is very striking. He looks like a rock star, and I don't. So I just felt like if I'm going to be on this stage with him, I need to do something. And so I just started wearing the crazy hats, and he didn't object, and I was grateful for that. And that on that DVD, that performance of Attitude song is probably done as much as anything to establish me in the world of guitar playing. I'm very grateful that exists, that for people to still, it's on YouTube.
Oh yeah, that whole thing was, everybody's set on that was really great. And then you come out and sing "Guitar Wants to Kill Your Mama" at the end there.
Yeah, that first tour with Eric and Joe and Steve was pretty magnificent. It was exciting to be a part of, and it was interesting for me years later to when Joe asked me to join his band, to have been a part of Steve's band on the road with Joe. So I experienced Joe from that perspective, just being the guy who was headlining the tour and I was in the middle band.
Yeah.
So years later, he called me up and said, I've been sitting here thinking that I want a keyboard player in my band, and I've been going, through my like mental Rolodex of keyboard players that I know. And then I thought of you, and I thought this is perfect because he's a guitar player who plays keyboards. He understands where guitar players come from. As a keyboardist, he said, I think that you can give me the space I need. I think what he was saying is that a lot of the keyboard players that he knows had a tendency to jazz things up with their voicings and maybe just like step on the sonic real estate that guitar that his guitar parts would be occupying. And then you take also into account Satriani's tone, which is just so thick and huge. He was looking for a keyboardist who could make room for that, but still provide the textures that he was looking for. So the first 3 years I was in Joe's band, I only played keys. I didn't play any guitar. And to kind of return back to your question of him as a band leader, very relaxed, much more relaxed than Steve and Frank. In some ways, Steve was an even more taskmaster is the wrong word, I think, but just like Frank was I think Frank was very open to the once Frank decided that he was going to come out of the basement where the synclavier was and here's this computer, the synclavier, that was able to do exactly what Frank insisted. And he did that for a few years, and then he suddenly found himself missing humans again and decided to go back on the road with a band, which he had sworn he was never going to do. But he was open to the idiosyncrasies of people, of humanity, and Steve was much more specific about what he required, and yeah, it was in some ways a harder gig than Zappa. With Satriani, on the other hand, obviously he wants you to play the songs properly, but he was very just kind of chill. If you know how the songs go, he's pretty happy about it, and then he'll tailor parts as needed. But he was always just sort of like, yeah, it's good, yeah, that's great, okay, next song. It was just kind of a chill vibe, and that but at the same time just like ferociously professional. And he had a manager who has sadly passed away under tragic circumstances, named Mick Brigden, and Mick just made sure that the wheels of that tour were really well oiled in a really professional way, and we were treated incredibly well, super super cushy accommodations, and always the best tour bus, and a totally handleable touring schedule. Whereas at one point on the Vai tour in '96, when I was the opening act, Beer for Dolphins were opening for Steve Vai, and we did 17 shows in 18 days at one point. And I was playing 2 shows a night with my band and with Steve, so I was on stage for like 3.5 hours, and it was demanding. That was when I was a young man and could handle it. I couldn't imagine
you had the claw by the end of that tour.
I absolutely. So with Satriani, it was just a more relaxed experience, and then at one point, 3 years in, he said, "Oh, let's get you on guitar for some tunes, and maybe 3 or 4 songs a night we'll have you on guitar," and then just kept getting added and added and added, so that most of the night I'd have a guitar on, and then he started getting into let's jam out a little bit at the end of the song, let's throw solo lines back and forth, and then those endings, those extended throwing solos back and forth endings would be longer than the song.
Right.
It's so at a certain point it just became like a free-for-all, but it was really fun, but at the same time daunting. I'm standing next to Joe Satriani, who never takes us, never sets a foot wrong, on the guitar. He's just like, his consistency is ridiculous, and I'm meant to trade solos with him. My whole thing as a musician is much more experimental and unpredictable, and I don't I don't care if I make a mistake in front of you. You know, I'm going for something. That's the Zappa approach. You know, what Frank always said, he'll stand up there and improvise an 8-minute solo that's meant to be a composition. He's attempting to create a new composition on the spot, and he always said that there's, you know, you're not going to see this in every band, a guy who's willing to stand in front of you and make a complete fool out of myself in an attempt to compose something new for you. But that's what his delight was, and that's also my delight as an improvising musician on stage. But with Satriani, with these tightly circumscribed 4-bar phrases back and forth, it's always about, all right, how can I make some kind of an impression here that won't make the audience just go, what the hell is that guy doing on stage, and won't sound, you know, just like a joke compared to what Joe was playing. So that was you know, some trial by fire stuff, which I think was very useful and helpful for me.
I think you held your own beautifully, and it
Thank
added,
you.
it added a nice contrast to the proceedings.
Well, we're certainly very different players, and
Yeah, very much.
you know, but it's, to this day, I'll see, it's like somebody has. There's a lot of videos on YouTube of Joe and I, you know, training solos, and I can't bear to watch.
Oh no.
That was good.
Devin as a band leader is just like,
yeah.
you know, he's 10 years younger than I am, so I'm the elder statesman in this band, and he has, you know, so much respect for me, which I am so grateful for. And so it's a completely different dynamic from those other things. But he is just as specific about his desires musically, and I'm like always like telling him that he doesn't need to feel bad in terms of telling me what to do, especially since, you know, we're executing a lot of things in unison. And, you know, he likes that sound. He likes the sound of two guys playing the same thing at the same time with the same sound. We both have, you know, fractal Axe Effects units that we're playing through with the same patches. And the idea is just supposed to be this monumental thing. And so the articulation has to be very specific. And I've got in-ears, and I've got Devin in my left ear, hard left, and I'm in my right ear, hard right. And I'm able to like really focus in on making sure that I'm executing and articulating in unison with him, and it's very exciting. It's really fun. And then there's moments in the show where things just get very experimental. There's a song called Deep Peace that I start out playing acoustic guitar on, and then for the middle section I move to an improvised piano solo that I'm also playing electric guitar. You know, like I'm sort of accompanying myself on electric guitar while I'm improvising on piano. And he's giving me space to do, you know, basically just have my head for those couple of minutes every night. And that's, I really appreciate that.
Any chance we might get some Disco Inferno this summer?
I don't think so. I don't, we didn't do it in
a random cover that you guys threw in occasionally, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, that was an important part of the Empath tour. But this is a very different vibe, very different tour. So I apologize.
Oh darn! Okay.
But similarly with the Zappa Band opening for Crimson, we have we've got a block of time that we cannot exceed. So it's not going to be an experimental thing. It's going to be another thing where we're playing the same show every night. We've got to keep
scripted.
We've got to keep it in this time zone.
Was there any music the Zappa Band covered that Frank had never played live?
Yeah, there were a couple of pieces that we played that we found. You know, one day Scott Tunis and I went to the Zappa offices and went just like tearing through all these cardboard boxes of manuscripts, Frank's manuscripts, looking for unreleased stuff that we could play. And in particular, there was a piece called Number 2 that was just a beautiful melody that was a complete song form with it was rare because most of the things we were finding were either published pieces, or if they were unpublished pieces, they were just like scraps. But this was a complete composition in his handwriting, with chord symbols and with articulation marks and with like repeats. It was a complete song form. So that was a beautiful piece that we didn't play on tour, but we did play. Well, we did play it on the hologram tour, actually. We played it on that tour. So and it's a really lovely thing.
Wow,
that must
must have been like digging up buried treasure.
Exactly like that.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly like that.
no doubt. Um, totally unrelated. You're from California. There's a group I've been getting into lately that I share with Valor. They had a documentary that was on Showtime or Netflix. Anyway, the group I'm talking about is Sparks, and I was wondering if you're a fan at all, and if you had any
Yeah, absolutely.
Sparks thoughts, because they are so unknown, but they're so brilliant. I mean, they've been going since like 1971. They have a new album that's getting rave reviews. It's out in about a week. It'll be like their 26th album, and I'm just kind of perplexed and astonished by these guys in a good way.
They're beautiful. They really found a vibe that was very unique to them. The relationship between those two guys and the way they portray it on stage, and they were never unknown to me because when Kimono My House came out, I was like just at the right age for it to hit me, and I was watching. At that time, Friday night was a heaven zone for rock music because ABC had a show called In Concert that would run from 11:30 to 1 a.m. And then you'd switch over to NBC and they had the midnight special that ran from 1 a.m. to 2:30. So every Friday night, that was 3 hours of modern contemporary rock music. And I found so many bands that the first time I heard Gentle Giant was on ABC In Concert. The first time I heard Mob Beach New Orchestra was on ABC In Concert. And the first time I heard and saw Sparks was on Midnight Special doing This Town Ain't Big Enough for Both of Us, or maybe it was Talent Is an Asset. Both of those songs hit me hard at the same time.
Oh,
And
that whole
and I was
record is just perfect. I
it
mean,
is. That is a perfect
they've
record.
gone through so many phases. I mean, if I was going to give somebody one to start with, I'd hand them that. But
Even all these decades later. But then years and years later, I'm in UK. I'm a guest at Dave Gregory's house from XTC, and he this is like the 2000, I guess, the year 2000, and he was just like saying, you need to listen to this, you need to listen to this, and he handed me Lil Beethoven,
oh yeah,
and that was like so different from Kimono My House. And I was like so excited to see that they had developed in this completely unexpected way.
yeah,
Because
kind of
I
symphonic.
had yeah, it was very, and it's good. It's like really really good.
That song,
Uh,
"My Baby's Taking Me Home," I think is just so brilliant. I mean, that's the only
yeah,
line, and it's repeated like 100 times, but you never get
yep,
tired of it. And
I
live,
know.
it's amazing. Like the whole
Yeah,
audience is doing this at the end.
yep, yeah. No, that's brilliant. That's brilliant composition. Um, because I wasn't collecting their albums, but I would like hear like what's the song with Jane Wiedlin that was like on the radio?
Um,
Cool Places.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I remember when that came out. And so every once in a while, I would just like I would bounce into Sparks again, and then when I heard the very early Half Nelson stuff that Todd Rundgren produced, I was like, wow, this is really good. This is like in some ways more eccentric than anything that came later. So there's a lot there. I mean, there's definitely a rabbit hole, and the movie was great. The thing that Edgar Wright
Yeah, I
did
mean,
with
that's
it.
what clued me to it. And it was just like, I just love discovering an old discography that I wasn't aware of, because it's just
Yeah,
waiting for you to dig in and buy it all. And it was like, oh, wait, these guys got 25 albums. Wow, it's going to be an interesting year. And
yeah,
then I
that's
went and saw
cool.
him live, and I was stunned that Russell still sounds exactly the same. I
Yeah,
mean, what a singer. I mean, he's almost like Freddie Mercury quality, but nobody knows who he is.
a total inspiration to Freddie Mercury, and yeah, force of nature that he still sounds that great.
Pretty amazing. So anyway,
Yeah,
well, thank you for the little detour there. I've gotten
yeah, you're
a
welcome.
kick
No
out of
problem.
listening to them. And I still feel like most people don't know who they are. So yeah,
Well, I think that movie helped certainly.
yeah, the Sparks Brothers documentary. Yeah, definitely
Hmm.
check that out, and you'll see a lot of familiar faces in it, like Beck and Todd Rundgren and
Yep.
number of big names of
Yeah.
fans. Baylor, did you have anything else you wanted to ask about?
Well, I mean, I would like to talk at very long length about MTFJ because, as you can see, I'm kind of doing the electronic thing myself.
True. This is
Right.
Um, yeah, and the challenge that I have is just the replicability of it, right? Because I'll spend hours at that thing making something that sounds cool, and then I'll make a recording of it, and then that's where typically it dies because
you've trapped it, and that's that.
yeah, and there's no possible way for me to recreate it. So at some point, it doesn't have to be now, but at some point, I would like to get your thoughts on. I have captured 2 or 5 or 7 or 15 or half an hour's worth of music that has been generated through these procedural circuitry kinds of things, and how do I get from that to, oh, this is a song? Because you guys have done it brilliantly. That's what I mean. The both of the MTFG albums. I listen to them quite a bit to get inspiration for some of the things I do with that thing.
Nice.
Because I don't want to go the trap of let me put dots on a piano roll in a MIDI editor so that I can crank it out the same way every time. I do like kind of the organic way in which working with a modular allows these things kind of to evolve over time. It's a very different process from traditional songwriting, but I think the way that you're able to take the kind of the synthetic organism of the electronic stuff and then the adding the guitar, adding the keyboards, adding acoustic, adding other sounds to it to make actual songs. I'm really inspired by that. So first of all, thank you for doing that project. But second of all, help.
Well, I mean, Scott Shore is the guy to talk to because my part in that process was entirely unmethodical. It was completely off the cuff. My job was simply to improvise on a number of instruments and then just throw all of this stuff at him, and he's the one who turned it into songs. So but it's interesting you should mention that because I am just really in a virtual way spending more time because I met the drummer in the Devin Band, this guy named Darby Todd, is friends with the guy who owns Softtube, who make a bunch of plugins that replicate a bunch of modular stuff. So and he turned out to be a fan of my music, and he's like, I'm going to send you a complete suite of plugins because I want to see how this affects your music. So I just got my hands on this stuff. So just over the last week and a half, it's not the same as what you're dealing with a huge piece of hardware on the wall. Right. But I'm dealing with the virtual versions of a bunch of modular stuff, and it's I've dealt with synth plugins, but I haven't gotten this deep into of at least a virtual version of modular synthesis before, and it's already affected a couple of pieces of music that I've been working on over the last week. So it was kind of funny to come onto the Zoom here and see that thing in your room. It's like, oh yeah, that looks just like the plugin I was tweaking a couple of days ago.
It's such a different headspace, and my fear is that as I'm sitting there for hour upon hour, plugging and unplugging cables and turning knobs and thinking this is sounding pretty cool, that if I play it for someone else, it's like, well, okay, now what?
Yeah, play me some blues. Pick up the guitar. Yeah,
exactly.
It's a deep obsession kind of thing, and only other people who are into it can understand.
Oh my goodness!
But I mean, I grew up, like the first music, the first like synthesis that had a huge impact on me was Switched on Bach when I was like 7 or 8 years old, and I just finished reading the biography of Bob Moog, which is called Switched On, which I highly recommend. It's a really, really brilliant book.
Love Moog. Yeah,
it's inspiring to read his story, even though his history was one of great commercial challenges. Because he was a creator, he was an artist, and it was a constant struggle his entire life figuring out how to effectively monetize his innovations. So you just have to be peaceful about it. It's like if Bob Moog himself had trouble making money off of it, what are any of us going to have what chance do we have with modular synthesis? but
Oh my word.
it's a fascinating world.
It's musical model trains, but there so I don't know if you know or not, some people do, some people don't, but there was an East Coast, West Coast synthesis thing. East Coast is Bob Moog, and the idea behind, having a keyboard as the controller for all of these things. There was a West Coast, which was, let's leave traditional music and means of expressing music completely behind. The guy who was responsible for West Coast synthesis, his name is Don Buchla.
All that is covered in the book.
Yeah.
And
So
I have some Buchla plugins in my rack as well.
Well, where I'm going with this is Wendy Carlos is to Bob Moog what Morton Subotnick was to Don Buchla. He recorded an album just a couple months after Switched on Bach called Silver Apples of the Moon. Yeah. And if you haven't heard that, you need to listen to that one. That one's amazing. Yeah,
the idea of non-keyboard oriented synthesis is like a mystery world to me. But it's exciting. It's amazing to imagine what's possible.
Yeah,
and I have heard that, and I have heard Silver Apples, and it's beautiful.
It really is. It really is. Well, man, it's so good to see you.
You too. And you too, Sean.
Yeah, it's great to catch up with both of you.
Yeah, for sure.
While I'm thinking about it, I do want to plug Vailer's show because we just wrapped up a 26 episode season where we basically, it's a reaction video, but it's a different kind. It isn't your usual cursory, oh my God, I can't believe I'm hearing this. I'm so tired of those. Those are so superficial. It's one where Vailer actually hasn't heard the album. He gives it a first listen. He shares his opinions, and then he goes away and listens to it for a number of days and comes back around to it. And in the process, he even composes a fresh piece of music as a soundtrack for the episode in the style of the record we're talking about. I don't think anybody does that. Anyhow, it's called The Albums I Have Missed.
Yeah.
It is on Vailer Truck's YouTube channel, so please check it out. It's really cool stuff. I think, Mike, you've seen a couple episodes, haven't you?
I have. It's a brilliant idea, and
thank you.
And of course your musicality is way beyond reproach. So and it also it fascinates me because so many of these records that you're hearing for the first time are records that I grew up listening to. So
right.
so to get your very informed, fresh perspective on that stuff is really, really great. Oh,
that means a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a pretty deep dive into prog. We're not going with your yeses and all that. You've heard all that before.
Yeah.
We're going to Canterbury, England, and hanging out and getting to know everybody around there for starters. And there's some fantastic music that came out of there. But we also dip into krautrock and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, check it out. Give him a sub. That'd be great. I think you'll
Thank you.
And he's got a new episode or a new series coming up, another season, where you can request an album for him to check out for the first time.
Yeah, and the music from this season is being slowly kind of congealed into a thick film that will eventually become a series of songs that I'm going to release as an album. So
nice. Oh, that's great. That's a good way to channel that inspiration. Cool.
Yeah.
Very cool stuff. Well, Mike, is there anything you'd like to share before we wrap it up here?
It's fun hanging out.
Yeah, it's good to see you. Definitely.
I think I'm good.
All right, cool. But
all right,
stick around for a minute. But we're going to wrap it up for our audience right now. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll be back in a few weeks. I've got a few high-profile guests in the pipeline for May, so stay tuned.